Robert William Simmons, known as Skinny amongst his family and friends, was born in Fawkner, Victoria, Australia in 1965 and was the youngest of 7 children, born to an alcoholic father and a mother who was addicted to barbiturates. For the Simmons children, Paul, John, Patricia, Margaret, Tony, Mark and Robert, life was somewhat dysfunctional. For the first year of Robert's life, the Simmons family remained in Australia before relocating to Malaysia. The family stayed there for around 3 years, and the children were looked after by servants, as their parents did what they pleased, spending most of their time out drinking alcohol together. Shortly after returning home to Australia, both parents got into a heated argument, which turned violent. Both left the residence where they were staying with their children. However, neither of them returned. Their mother had actually been involved in a car accident the previous night in Mordialloc, which resulted in months of hospitalisation for a back injury she had sustained in the crash. The father simply never returned. He later remarried, but failed to tell his new wife that he already had 7 children. Without their parents present, the Simmons children found life to be a lot more peaceful, despite the obvious difficulties they faced. Patricia, Robert's eldest sister, even states in the Australian true crime podcast that her siblings were all glad that their parents were gone. She referred to both her mother and father as mad and chaotic. As a result of having no parents around to support them, the children had to fend for themselves, with the older siblings, Paul and Patricia, who were both still under 16 years old at the time, having no other option but to steal food in order to provide for their younger siblings. The children were eventually placed in temporary care of an aunt before being made wards of the state. The Simmons children were subsequently placed in a group care home in the city Bacchus Marsh, Victoria, from 1970 to 1975, where the young Robert and his siblings faced violent abuse, with the traumas they faced affecting them all severely. Following his time at the care home, Robert relocated around 85 kilometres away to Mordialloc, where he lived with his mother and stepfather and attended Parkstone Primary School and Parkdale Secondary. Robert was described as being kind, funny, generous, fun-loving, active and adventurous. He was also very passionate about reptiles and team sports and activities. Specifically, he enjoyed playing cricket and being in the Venturer Scouts. His passion for water sports, which arose during his time in the Scouts, led to Robert joining the Royal Australian Navy, training at HMAS Cerberus from 1984 to 1986. It was during this time, however, that 22-year-old Robert began using marijuana. He was found to be in possession of the drug on a number of occasions at the naval base, and as a result spent some time in solitary confinement. Robert then fell into a drug-induced psychosis and was subsequently sent to a psychiatric facility for treatment. However, his condition did not improve. After being discharged from the Navy on medical grounds following unsuccessful psychiatric treatment, Robert was placed on a Navy pension on the condition he attended yearly medical reviews. According to his sister Patricia, she last saw her brother on the 28th of February 1987, her wedding day. Robert, who carried a backpack over his shoulders, told her that he was planning on hitchhiking to Queensland to work on a fishing trawler. By this time, Robert had been briefly living in St Kilda, Melbourne. According to one source, in that same February, Robert had travelled with a friend to King's Cross in Sydney. In November, Robert was due to attend his yearly medical appointment with the Royal Australian Navy in regards to his invalidity payments. However, he failed to show up. According to his sister, Robert was still using cannabis at the time, and knowing that those who use drugs would most likely do anything to get their hands on money to fund their habits, it seemed odd for Robert not to show up. Failing to attend this appointment would put his future payments in jeopardy. Robert's siblings grew concerned after not hearing from him for a prolonged period of time, and as a result, his sister Patricia filed a missing persons report in early 1988. A lot happened in the few years leading up to Robert's disappearance, including the deaths of both Simmons' parents. Patricia was unsure whether anyone had actually heard from Robert in recent months, as life had been rather chaotic at that time, and it was following a number of inquiries to family and friends that she realised nobody had heard from her youngest sibling in quite some time. It was presumed that Robert had simply stayed in Sydney, but just hadn't made contact, therefore nobody realised that he was missing. This was until the bank contacted the Simmons family in 1992 and asked them what to do with the money left in Robert's bank account, which was going to be closed. The account had been left untouched since February of 1987, which was extremely unusual and a cause for concern. Initially, police didn't seem to take Robert's disappearance very seriously, but despite this, Patricia continued to file missing persons reports for her brother year after year. Police reiterated that Robert was an adult and that if he chose to disappear of his own accord, he had the right to do that. Also, there appeared to be no obvious suspicious circumstances in regards to his disappearance. Therefore, there wasn't anything the authorities could do in regards to an investigation. Robert had simply vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. In November of 1994, whilst on vacation in Cairns, Tony Simmons, Robert's brother, actually, quote, bumped into an old school friend of his missing brother, a man named Colin Hayes. The pair ended up talking about Robert, and interestingly, Colin expressed to Tony that he was, quote, sorry to hear that Robert drowned in the late 1980s in Sydney. Unfortunately, Colin didn't offer any further assistance as to how he fell upon this information, and unfortunately, he hasn't been traced or questioned by authorities regarding these claims. Naturally, rumours began circulating regarding as to what fate befell Robert, with some friends stating that the 22-year-old attended a party with another friend who had accompanied him to Sydney. It is alleged that the pair went to buy some alcohol, however Robert never came back, and his friend allegedly gave a number of conflicting accounts regarding Robert's whereabouts and what had happened that night. The one constant throughout the many stories rumoured was Robert allegedly drowning. Whether this is fact or fiction remains to be seen, as other witnesses claim to have seen Robert following this alleged incident. 3 years later, in 1997, searches were conducted in relation to water-related deaths in the states of Victoria and New South Wales during the period in which Robert vanished, but unfortunately nothing came of this. In the late 1990s, Patricia, who was continuing to fight for the truth in regards to her brother's disappearance, filed yet another missing persons report and contacted the Salvation Army's tracing service, who took on the monumentous task of searching for Robert. They conducted a number of searches over a 3-year period, including looking into death records in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, but unfortunately found no trace of him. Patricia has conducted her own investigations over the years and, following extensive efforts into tracing them down, questioned all of Robert's friends in order to create a timeline leading up to the last sighting of Robert. Unfortunately, we still don't know what happened following his disappearance. Did Robert decide to start his life anew in Sydney following a difficult childhood and adolescence, or did something more sinister happen to him? Did he owe someone drug money, or was he involved in some sort of accident? Despite the endless scenarios, this case is still being treated as a missing persons case rather than a homicide, though Patricia believes her brother to be deceased. Whilst on the Australian true crime podcast, Patricia claimed that Robert was homosexual, and during the 1980s, Sydney's gay community fell victim to a number of murders, resulting in several homosexual men being pushed off cliffs by anti-gay hate gangs. Patricia believes that Robert could have been a victim to such a horrendous crime, or that he may have been murdered by an acquaintance, or even had a run-in with the backpack murderer Ivan Milat, who murdered at least 7 people between 1989 and 1993, all aged between 19 and 22, burying their remains in Belangolo State Forest. The possibilities as to what happened to Robert is endless. In 2009, his brother and sister, Tony and Patricia, gave DNA samples to the Victorian authorities, who in turn compared the DNA to unidentified remains that were in their database, but no match to their lost brother was found. Robert's dental record was also obtained from the early 80s, but once again, their efforts to identify any of these John Does as Robert proved to be fruitless. According to a Facebook page regarding Robert's disappearance, the Australian True Crime Podcast's episode about Robert's case has resulted in some new information coming to light, which police are currently following up. Hopefully, with such media exposure, these new leads will go somewhere. It's been 36 years since the seaman vanished, and what truly happened to Robert Simmons remains a mystery to this day. At the time of his disappearance, Robert Simmons was 22 years old, standing at 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a slim build and weighing approximately 130 pounds. He is described as being of Caucasian origins, with golden brown hair and blue eyes, and can speak Cantonese, Malay, and English. His last known residence was in St Kilda in Melbourne in 1987, though his last known location is believed to be Sydney. If alive today, Robert would be 57 years old. Despite the years that have passed, Robert's remaining family have not given up hope that someday the truth will come to light. The search for him has been emotionally and physically draining on Patricia, who has spent much of her time devoted to finding Robert, appealing on social media in recent years for any information. But regardless of the many setbacks, she is determined to, one way or another, bring Robert home so that she and her family can finally move on with their lives and have some closure. She firmly believes that someone out there knows what happened to her younger brother and is desperate for the person or persons involved to come forward. Anyone with any information regarding the disappearance of Robert Simmons are urged to contact Australian Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000.